Whose responsibility is it to fix the corruption? Is it the Afghans, or do we get involved?
Well, if you take a purist sense, you say it's an Afghan problem. But every organization, particularly as they grow, needs help with that. We're here to help Afghanistan stand on its feet. So the instructions I've given to the force is where you can, point out corruption, also be a good example, use every different method to teach, to cajole, and to report, so that we are not supposed to stand there and see corruption and not report it. We should first confront the person, but also report it up the chain, because we've got to shine a light on it. We're not going to arrest everybody who's ever taken a bribe. Mm-hmm. What we are going to do, though, is try to focus on them and increase the required level of honesty and integrity throughout the force.
So it's a different mindset you're looking for.
It is, and it's part of real partnering. If you were partnered with an American service member and they accepted a bribe, you'd be absolutely floored, and you'd immediately do something about it. You can't stand back and say, well, that's just the way it is in the Afghan force, because it's not the way it is. This is fair. This level of corruption in Afghanistan is not something that's been around for generations. This is really a product of the last 20 years, not even the last 30 years.
I'd always assumed that corruption was cultural.
No, there is culture in many countries where you have little things. One country, it's speed money and whatnot. But that's not the case. That level of corruption has existed in Afghanistan. What we have now could be called hyper-corruption. It's levels of corruption that really came in at the departure of the Soviets and the rise of the warlords. And we had chaos in the country, and people will say in chaos there's great profit, and many people did make great profit in that, and that has continued on, and that's deeply offensive to Afghans. When we sit and talk to Afghan leaders, to Afghan students, to Afghan soldiers, it's just hugely upsetting to them, and they want it stopped. But it's like being at a side of a big problem. Like, where do you start, and how do you do your part? We can't solve it. They have to solve it, but we have to provide the help, the pressure, the support to help go after it.
Let's talk about the enemy now. We know we have the Taliban in the south. Who else is out there?
There are a number of groups. Sometimes Taliban is lumped together and used, insurgent and Taliban. That's really not correct. When you use the term Taliban, I think of Quetta Shura-based Taliban, which is the south. There is the Haqqani network, which operates in the center or eastern part of Afghanistan, operates out of northwest frontier provinces, the FATA, Miram Shires of Pakistan. That is, but it's an Afghan organization and that threatens inside Afghanistan. And that's one of the things we have to partner with our Pakistani partners to help reduce their effect. Then there's Hizb al-Islami Gilbuddin, that's Hek Madyar's group. It tends to be more in the northeast, but it'll reach other places, and it reaches into the north. Then there are a number of smaller groups that sort of fit in those. There are relationships between the groups, operational relationships. There are, you could call alliances. Al-Qaeda has relationships with almost all of those groups with differing levels of influence or dependency on in some cases. So what we have to do is identify each for their individual attributes and deal with each separately, but understand that cumulatively they are an existential threat to the country.
What about the warlords?
There are still warlords, and they are still a problem in Afghanistan. And the term is probably misunderstood, because warlord brings up one set of mind, but there's no single mindset for a warlord. We have people who became very powerful and are now in the government and are operating completely correctly, legitimately, but some people will have used that term with them. We have others who operate, in my view, incorrectly. And the warlord terminology, assuming that's a negative term, is still appropriate. It's absolutely appropriate. So I think whenever you talk about someone who's gathered power, typically illegitimately, and uses it inappropriately, then you could call them power broker or warlords, and they still exist.
Sir, do you have all that you need for ISAF?
We need more trainers, and we've asked the coalition to provide us more trainers for Afghan National Army and Afghan National Police. That's initial entry training. We need what we call mentoring teams, operational mentoring, liaison teams, OMLETs, and police operational mentoring teams, POMLETs. And we're asking all of the countries to provide whatever they can as quickly as they can, because as we grow the Army and Police faster, the importance of those trainers is higher than ever. We did receive the additional, well, we are receiving the additional forces that President Obama and coalition partners have pledged. Those are moving in already. Some are already in combat. I feel very good about that, but the trainer part, I still would ask all of the nations to help with.
How do you balance the needs of an alliance like NATO with the needs of a coalition like ISAF?
Sometimes you have to balance the goals of individual nations, because for domestic political consumption, each individual nation has certain goals. And that's the challenge of any coalition, because you're trying to bring together the objectives of a range of people, or countries in this case, for a common mission. And everybody has certain needs that they feel that they must address as well. And you don't ignore those and you don't trample over them, you just try to fit them together in the best way possible. So it actually works pretty well.
Sir, how will we know that you've achieved success?
When the Afghans have the freedom to choose, and when I say across Afghanistan, it won't be every Afghan in every corner of the place, but when the government is strong enough that can give Afghans that opportunity, and when I say not just choose as in vote in elections, but choose what kind of economy they want to have, choose whether they're in the army or not, when the insurgency is to a point where it just doesn't affect individuals in the majority of the country on a daily basis. It doesn't color everything the government has to do or not do based on that. And then the Afghans have the ability to move forward. Then I think for us, we will have been successful, because I think our Afghan partners at that point will absolutely be able to deal with it.
We're over 8 years into this war. The troops, how are they doing?
We've got people through this force who have been on multiple tours. I run to non-commissioned officers 4 and more tours. I run into people who've been wounded multiple times. What I never see is people who just don't exhibit the values that I'm proud to associate with. It's sort of extraordinary. If you go in history and you ask a professional army to wage a war this long, you'd expect a lot more negative things. Now, I understand that there's a cost being paid by every service member and their families. But when I watch what they do and then I see the strength of their families, it's extraordinary. The support of the American people has been key. Projects like Wounded Warrior have been key. Military housing, all the things we've done have been key, and I'm really grateful to Congress and the other elements that do that. But wouldn't it have been something you could have calculated in 2001? If you thought we'd still be fighting in 2010 and pushing this hard, you just wouldn't have been able to predict how strong the people are. And of course, that's extraordinarily positive for anybody who's part of this.
General McChrystal,